Okay. Okay, so I think it's recording. That neatly from the Weymouth crew saying that they're in danger of flooding leads into our subject for the evening, adaptation. So Becs is here. He's going to talk to us all about adaptation and how things can link in with climate emergency centres. We're definitely hoping we can help with lots of things in the future. So over to Becs without too much further ado. Becs, yes,
Thanks,
tell us about adaptation. Over.
That's fantastic. Hello, everyone. I'll give you a little bit more background about myself so you can understand why you might want to listen to me. So I'm a trained nurse and I'm also a policy professional. I've worked mostly on climate and health, but I've lived on a lot of land-based communities and I've spent time as a community worker, and my overwhelming preoccupation at the moment is community-led climate adaptation. So this came about as a result of a conversation that Ruth and I had, where I was talking to her about what I'm interested in and what Cadence Roundtable does, which is one of the organisations I work for. And she said, I think you should come and talk to us. And so here I am, and I'm so pleased to be here. So I had a long think about how to structure this, because I really think it should be a conversation, and I'm aware that different people will be at different levels on their thinking on this. It's so interesting that Weymouth, of course, I know Weymouth quite well, and of course it's a watery place. So what I wanted to do was, when Cadence Roundtable do these sessions, which anyone is invited to, we have a tendency to do very content dense sessions. And I don't think that's suitable here, but I wanted to give you a little taster of the resources that are out there. And I probably will speak most about flood, just because I can, if I stick to one theme, I don't have to talk for too long, and then we have lots of time for chat. But my assumption is that if there is interest and you want to look more closely at any of the subjects, then I will come back and do other sessions another time. I'm really happy to do that. Okay, so the things I would like to cover, and I'm going to try not to talk too much. There are interactive moments, so I'm sorry if there's lots of me gabbing. I'm going to cover four things in essence. So we're going to talk a little bit about what adaptation is, and I have a slightly broader perspective on that. I'm going to explain why I think it's relevant to CECs, but that will be very obvious to some of you already. But why I think CECs are uniquely placed to offer certain support. And then I'm going to touch on resources, but I'm going to skip through that super quick, because I will send somebody, probably Mary, a list of all the resources that you can use if you want to. And I'm really happy for people to come back to me and talk about those. And then we're going to have a little discussion, and I've got a few questions that I'm very curious about, but I really want to know what you want to talk about in relation to this subject. So here we are, we're 1:15. Okay, so when I talk about adaptation, does anyone want to have a little bash at what they understand adaptation to be? Is there anyone who fancies a go at that? Go for it, Henry.
Adaptation is about, well, there's mental and physical adaptation. Physical is preparing your buildings and infrastructure for extremes in temperature, water, too much water, too little water, no food. And the mental adaptation for the fact that we could be queuing for food, or, you know, in a system with mass migration, which we've suddenly fast forwarded with Ukraine. So it's about that, putting into place measures now, along with mitigation, to ensure that with the wave of climate shocks coming, that we're prepared as a society.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, that's pretty much it. So I have a slightly broader way of talking about it, but in a sense, Henry, you've already covered it. I have slightly different words that I use, but it's very unusual for people to reference what I would call social adaptation, which is your kind of, in a way, mental adaptation. So that's really good. I'm really glad that happened, because mostly when government do adaptation stuff, and they don't do enough, as we know, and the CCC are talking about this all the time, the Climate Change Committee are talking about this all the time. What they're doing is what we might describe as infrastructure adaptation, which is kind of coastal flooding and defences to buildings and so on. And we're still quite a long way from being good enough on that. But then there's all this social adaptation stuff, and some of it is really, really heartening. So this isn't purely a bad news story. And if we've got time, I'm going to read you a little bit from a Rebecca Solnit book, because it's a really uplifting way of thinking about this subject. So I'm going to say a little bit more about the different ways in which those relate now. So when we think about infrastructure, sometimes it's easy to think about like grand scale infrastructure, like drainage systems would be a good, really good one. And then kind of electricity supplies and all the different things that we're using all the time. But infrastructure in terms of climate change, if we look at some of the climate change events that we've seen in the UK already, some of them are very small. So I'll give you an example. During Storm Desmond in Lancaster, where they lost electricity for a long time, infrastructure adaptation could have been as simple as having a phone that is plugged into the wall. So a phone that's plugged into a wall gives you a long time because the electricity comes down the line. And so when you're relying on a mobile, you've only got a few hours before, if you've got no electricity, before that's out and your lifeline has gone. If you've got a landline, that will be there and you will be able to use it. So that's an example of micro infrastructure, if you like. So and this is something that we all have agency over, but also that we can talk to households about if they want information. And then the second example of social infrastructure, I'm going to focus on flooding. There's a lot of things I could talk about in terms of climate impacts. But for the UK, principally, at the highest level, we're talking about things like heatwave, storm and flood. And there are what we might describe as cascade effects under that, which is some of the chaos that Henry has alluded to. What I'm going to do is quite simply connect this now to what I see CECs doing. And I think these kind of pre-placed resources, when you talk to emergency preparedness people in local authorities, they get very excited about pre-placed resources, and they mean all sorts of things. But a CEC is a classic pre-placed resource because it's there, people are ready, and often it's just about having somewhere to go and somewhere for people to meet and start to get organised. So if we think about things like, it's obviously not a climate emergency, but if you think about Grenville, well, the story that came out of Grenville for all of us who were following that, it was really a story about community and community gathering together and getting really organised. And strategically, a lot of the things that should have helped were very slow to help. The same in Germany with the floods, very, very slow responses for all sorts of complicated reasons. So sometimes it's just us on the ground being prepared to work with one another. And I feel like it's possible that CECs could become a place that people turn to. You're identifying yourselves as climate people who are taking action on climate, and to some extent who are climate ready. So listen to Henry and friends in Weymouth. So what I'm going to say, I'm going to say a little bit more about why it's relevant to CECs, but I think it's probably obvious to all of you. And I don't think it's always about having kit lying around ready to help people. There is all sorts of kit that we could have in CECs, but I recognise that that's a complicated business. Meanwhile, leases and all the rest of it. So I'll just give you one example of a kind of finding that came out of what happened in Lancaster with Storm Desmond, but also what happened to a colleague of mine who was flooded on her road. And in both examples, there were consequences that came out of the fact that no one was prepared to call it an emergency. And this is a very simple thing that a CEC could do. If somebody is at a CEC and people are starting to gather, giving people a permission to feel like this is an emergency is really important. So I'll just tell you about the Storm Desmond example. So in Storm Desmond, they lost, the substation was flooded and they lost power. A huge amount of people lost power for quite a few days. And the impacts of that were extraordinary. There are so many detailed impacts. And if we have another session, I will go into that in more detail because it's really fascinating. And all the good things that we know that come out of these emergencies happen. People gathered together, people organized themselves. But one of the things that happened was that you couldn't buy anything in a shop because all the tills weren't working because there was no electricity. And there was one shop that had a generator. And so it was able to run. But it was on a Sunday. And the young woman who wasn't used to being in charge was running the shop. And she was not prepared to breach the Sunday trading hours. And so it was the only shop open, the only place that people could buy food. And yet the shop closed at 4 o'clock. So that's a really interesting example of not feeling like you have permission to behave like it's an emergency. She's a young woman, she doesn't want to take the call. Similarly, more dramatically, the Environment Agency didn't put up the flood barriers, and they didn't do that because the person who was prepared to take that call was not on. They weren't at work. So, you know, this is why hierarchy is such a problem, is it not? But so being prepared to call it an emergency and to say, you know, this is a difficult time. These are the things that we're going to do, and we're going to do them together so it doesn't feel scary. So where are we now? 25 past. I'm not going to read the Solnit piece because I think it's only a paragraph, but I think it will take up too much time. But if we have time at the end, I'll close with it because it's really heartening. Okay, so what I want to do now is just really quickly give you a little toe dip into some resources. So I can't go through these in too much detail because it will take up all of our nice discussion time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use two different resources, and I'm going to focus just on flooding for now, partly because this is a nice example of where you could become the people who give information before something happens, and also to be available to people when something has happened. So resources work in two ways. There's resources that you might use for yourselves, and then resources that you'd be happy to use with other people. So I'm going to kind of go backwards and start with the resources that you might be happy to use with other people. So if you can go to the top of the chat, and you get to the chat by just clicking on that wee speech bubble at the bottom, and you'll see in the top of the chat, you'll see all these links. So in different countries of the UK, there are these really, really good resources. They're incredibly simple to use, and they enable you. And I would invite you now, if you want to click on the link that suits where you are. And I don't think we've got any Welsh folk today. Click on the link that suits you. So probably for most of you, it will be England. And then you should have a screen come up that will enable you to put your postcode in. Now you can do this now if you want to, but if you don't know your own flood status, you might want to wait and do this afterwards. But if you're happy to put in your work address or something else, or I can share my screen and just show you where I used to live, because I don't live in England anymore. So I'm just gonna, well, I got permission to share my screen, Uncle Phoenix. I know how to do that. Can you hear me all right? I'm wondering whether I've been prattling on and no one could hear me. Yeah, you can. Okay, great. Phoenix, do you know whether I can? I'll have a go.
I can't see the actual link in the chat. Ah, there we go. It's there now.
Yeah. So if you go to the top of the chat, you'll see loads of different links, and you want to click on the England link if you're in England. And that will take you to, right, I might be able to share my screen now. No, I don't think I can. Okay, well, let's assume that you're in, but you're welcome to do this afterwards. And then you'll see at the top of the screen, so I'll just talk you through it because I've got it up. At the top of this, at the top of the screen, where it says location, and you'll see there's a drop menu which allows you to kind of look at which depth of flooding or level of risk you would like to. You can put in a postcode and you'll see a lovely map that will give you some idea of the level of risk. So, and you can scroll in and out. So what that will do is show you different levels of risk. And the reason this is important is because of course, what we need to know first is the degree to which we're exposed to flooding. Now, there's a caution here, and that is that all of the environment agencies across the UK will be using fairly conservative measures of flood risk. So we should not assume that even though we might be quite a few miles out from flooding, that means that we are immune over time.
Becs, I've just made you a co-host, which should mean that you can share your screen. So
fabulous. Right, let's see if that's going to work then. I'll just quickly do that just so that I can show you around a bit, but it feels like it's probably pretty self-explanatory, but let's just...
Yeah, share screen and then click on the screen on your computer that you want to share. Yeah.
Can you see a map?
Yes.
Yay. Okay, great. It works. How exciting. So what you'll see there is Norwich, and this is where I used to live in England. And you can see these different degrees of flooding. And you can home in and look at your own little tiny area of your postcode and get some sense of what's going on there. So I use this as an example of how you might give information to other people. And there are so many degrees of information. So you can look at historically your area, and you can look at projected flooding, all sorts of things like that. I'm going to give lots and lots of links and information to Mary, and she's going to send them out to you if you want them. So we don't need to spend too much time on this just now. The second thing I'd like you to do is, this is more like a resource for you. And I'm just going to, with your permission, just take a few minutes to show you the very, very beginning of a film that's been put together by a guy called Ed Beardsley, who I really love. And he's just explaining what's in floodwater. So I'll show you the beginning, but this is available online, and it's part of a series called Hazard and Hope. And they're really beautiful films that explain how you might retrofit, or how you might make a building resilient to floodwater. But in this one, he's particularly talking about what's in floodwater, which is really valuable knowledge if you might find yourself in the situation where you're dealing with it. So now that our screens are shared, I might have to go back and make sure it's the right bit, mightn't I? Let me just, sorry guys, let me just.
Cool, all good.
Yeah.
We might have to be dealing a lot more of this with recent news that the Arctic's gone up to 40 or 70 degrees or something.
Right, so we're in the middle of a heat wave in the Arctic.
Yeah, Arctic and Antarctic.
Sorry, I don't know what I've done here. What have I done? Right, so I stopped sharing, sorry, and now I understand. Right, and then I would like to screen share Mr. Beardsley. Okay, so you should be able to see something called What's in Floodwater.
Yeah, we can see that. Just press
Ruby,
play maybe.
okay, I'm really sorry if the sound's crap. I'm just going to show you a couple of minutes, but this is available online in the Hazard and Hope series. But it just gives you a sense of the quality of information that's out there. So we'll just.
Hello and welcome to Hazard and Hope.
So we're going to start. Sorry, we're not going to start right at the beginning. We're going to start here. Right, so this is where he starts to talk about what's in floodwater.
We're going to begin by looking at some of the more artificial elements and then move on to more natural types of debris a bit later on, because these are going to cloud up the water and make it difficult to see. From the outset though, I just want to be really clear that this is not something to try at home or to mess around with in any way. It's really important that we're aware of the significant threat that floodwater can pose. To begin with, we have the water itself. Now, this as a substance can, of course, be incredibly dangerous, particularly where there are strong currents, deep depths, or high velocity flows. It may well be that the floods are actually from a coastal context and that this is a saltwater mixture. Now, that can cause the corrosion of materials, can lead to the contamination of freshwater aquifers, and significantly affect the fertility of agricultural lands. As floodwaters rise and move across different terrains, they can also come into contact with things like power lines. Well, these could well have been knocked down by the storms that brought the rain or waves, but when submerged, these can pose a major risk to life and sadly lead to things like electric shock drowning. It's also very common to see a variety of different electrical goods, such as TVs or computers, or even headphones, being caught up in floodwater and becoming part of that mix. Next, we've got important documents. So this could be things like birth certificates, passports, insurance details, or even cherished objects and photos that may well be irreplaceable. When these come into contact with floodwater, they can be damaged beyond repair. Things like toilet paper, sanitary products, and even human feces can also find their way into this mix, particularly if sewage pipes have surcharged. It may well also be that there's actual animal excrement within the floodwater itself. That could well have been washed off neighbouring fields, farms, or parks. This particular stuff's actually from our chickens. Sharp objects like glass, nails, and even needles can also find their way into floodwater. We'll be able to see these for now, but when we add in some of the sand and soil in a minute, and the water becomes murky, it'll be a lot more difficult to see. So we need to remember that these different items are going to be sitting in that sludge and slurry that remains after the water recedes. Vehicles can also be very easily picked up and carried by floodwater. It only takes about 6 inches of water to make a car become unstable, between 1 and 2 feet, depending on the type of vehicle, to actually make it float. We can also find that corrosive substances such as bleach and battery acid are part of this floodwater mix. And poisonous ones like pesticides and herbicides can also be washed in when garage or storage areas flood.
Okay, I'm really sorry. I know it's really frustrating that I'm stopping that there, but I feel like we need to prioritise our discussion. But like I say, this is available, and I will include that link along with all of other Ed Beasley's other stuff, which is much less frightening, actually. It's much more about what you can do in a property. But you can see the quality of the information that he's trying to give and how that might help us think through how we might manage in a flood situation. Okay, so the last thing that I wanted to do was just drop some potential questions into the chat. So if you just bear with me, I'm going to go back to my notes and just make sure that I've got those. Okay, what have I done there? Let's just get rid of that. Okay, so along with the resources that I'm going to send, there will be two other things that are really important to mention just now. One is the organisation that I helped convene, which is the Cadence Roundtable. We spend a lot of time thinking about these things and meeting together. People who are worried about preparing for climate change, anyone's welcome to join. You'll find us on Eventbrite, and we cover topics like this. We just had a big flood session where we went through a lot of these materials. And the second thing, especially if you're worried about flooding, or you find talking about the preparing for climate change very anxiety provoking, I would encourage you to look at the Climate Psychology Alliance. They have a really good amount of material on their website, but they also offer pro bono psychological support to activists and people working in the field. They're really good people. I really rate them. We work with them really closely. Okay, so let me just stop gabbing and pop these thoughts into the chat. So we can talk about these questions, or we can talk about something else, but I'm really curious to know, what you'd like to talk about. So please do jump in with responses if you want to. Go for it, please, Danny.
Yeah, maybe I'll kick the ball off, saying a few things.
Actually, Phoenix, Danny had her hand up. But
go on. Yeah, you go. I can't see full screen. Go for it. Yeah.
It's okay. I was fiddling about with finding the mute button. I think the thing that really struck me in what you've said so far is about permission, and this idea of treating it as an emergency, because I think that's kind of our main barrier at the moment. And in Kingston in particular, even at our fundraiser, we had environmentalists who have been active for 30, 40 years, taking, umbrage with Climate Emergency Centre being part of our name, because it causes too much anxiety. And I think that was one thing that really struck, and how we're going to deal with that, I'm not sure.
Well, it's interesting that you can be in an emergency, a literal severe weather event emergency, and still not be able to treat it as emergency. I mean, it's something very deep in the English psyche, I think. Yeah, it's a really
keep
good
calm
point.
And carry on.
Yeah, it's a really good point, Danny. Other thoughts? I'm interested. Go on, Phoenix, go ahead.
I've been an environmentalist and an activist for 30 odd years, and we've been setting up these eco centres and getting on the news and trying to tell people it's critical at the moment. We need to do stuff and we need to focus on solutions, and particularly since Copenhagen Climate Summit, asking everyone and pushing out for a Solutions Zone TV that we need to work on the solutions. And something Ruth said to me was, really, a lot of people didn't even know there was a problem. They weren't ready for the solutions. And one thing that XR did and does is raised awareness that there is actually a really serious climate emergency. You've got all these tipping points that are coming in now. And, as many of the movements over the years, we've been against things, but what we also need to be is for the solutions and what we can practically do. I suppose my earliest programming is as a survivalist, I suppose. And, we really need these physical spaces where people can prepare, get things together, whether it's resources, training. Some of the ideas that have been chatted around a little bit, we want to do as a CEC network. One idea was everyone does a tree planting weekend. We link CECs with land CECs or landowners, and we all go out and plant 1,000 trees from each CEC, in a weekend. The other idea that hasn't been gone too far into, but I think Una brought up was we should go and do flood defence work. And funnily enough, in Shropshire, where she's from, I saw something on the chat saying, "Oh, Shropshire Council's offered a building." And I was like, "Oh, that's great news, fantastic!" And they said, even a CC could be a environmental wing linked with the council. I was like, okay, they're getting really keen. And then I saw the news that Shropshire was seriously flooded, and a couple of days before. So I think climate impacts are coming up in conversations, definitely, and more mainstream, and we've got it into the mainstream news. But people feel a bit doomed, or they feel, what can we do, or helpless. We need to give people the spaces and the tools and a kind of program of action. We need, last bit really is just, I'm the son of a Marine, and I'm also the son of 2 Dublin fire station masters. These centres are kind of fire stations, as Greta Thunberg says, the planet's, on your house is on fire, and we urgently need these spaces to get together, to plant trees, build flood defences, and work on solutions, and they're motherships of many other projects. So we really need these spaces, and we need to raise awareness and take action.
It's nice to hear about the tree planting, because that's such a good segue between the two, mitigation and adaptation, and it makes, because it encourages soak away and soaking up of flood water.
Can I just answer the last little bit of your question there? I'll answer the first bit. Is there anything you want to do? Yes, centres and do the tree planting. Do you have what you need? No. What we need is buildings, the political will, funding and skills. And we've been asking for 30 years and we still haven't got any funding or anything.
Yeah, that's understood actually, but it was much more to find out whether the people here who are involved in CECs feel like they have what they need on the ground just now on adaptation. But yeah, I totally get the big point.
Yeah.
Mo, can we go to you next? Because you had a hand up for a wee while, and then Suzanne, and then Danny.
So I think, well, I've been part of environmental groups for 15, 20 years, and I'm also Quaker and committed to sustainability. The common theme, whether we look at COVID or the climate emergency or, the wars and all that, is about building resilient communities. To me, that's a common theme running, and that's, I think, where we need to focus. In building communities, helping each other, supporting aging populations suffering from loneliness, isolation, mental health issues, community gardens, taking over really a whole bunch of spaces which are at the moment not being used, not being utilized for anything useful. And do guerrilla gardening or whatever is needed. And I think the resources are there. We are the resources. It's about connecting and mobilizing the people and putting them into action. And I think we can achieve a lot if we just get together and move in the same direction. So waiting for policies to change, that's not going to happen. There is a conflict of interest. So I think it's us really who have the mandate to take the authority and do something about it.
Yeah. 100%. Yes, Suzanne, I think next.
Hi everyone, it's lovely to have this chat. I have been quite scared off by both of those words, mitigation and adaptation, when I first saw them on the description. However, how I've gone through the sort of process of the last 6 months, really, maybe not as much as that, but I know we don't have, I know we need more people that are psychiatrically or philosophically or sociologically trained to talk to people, not necessarily that they have an anxiety that, we're losing biodiversity, that we're losing all the grief, but actually that part of, yes, okay, you have permission, and stop denying this is a bit of an emergency. And I even did it just now. That people say, okay, well, let's just role play 6 months' time a flood. And that exact permission to say yes, and you need to open the shop, or you're going to face some violence about getting your shop bashed in and people raiding your shop, to actually, you know, stop being the British politeness. And what I see an awful lot of is we've got poverty in our area, and we need to help them get over the energy bills that they're going to have. So we're going to talk about lowering our demand for energy, and also using the energy well in our house. So we're going to make draft excludes, and we're all going to feel very happy and feel that we've bonded because we're making something that's a solution. But that seems to be really quite some distance away from where are you on this map, and how soon will you be flooded, and what emotionally are you going to do about it, what practically are you going to do about it, because the two things are in Wandsworth, and there's so much to do. The list is so long. Honestly, I've got 4 people and none of them are full-time. I just feel like we're going to get swallowed up by incredibly anxious people that actually just want to save the bees. And it's just, the disparity is just a nightmare for me. And I'm feeling quite weirded out, but I think your tools are great.
So these are tools that are publicly available. I'm really glad that you said what you have, Suzanne, because I think feeling overwhelmed is a massive risk, and especially if you step out, if CECs step out as a source of information, which isn't necessarily what I'd recommend, but if people come to you, it's really nice to know that those tools are there and you can support people to find information. I'd like to go back one step in your question, because one of the things that things like disaster studies, but also case studies of severe weather events show us, is that actually when you're sitting there making your draft excluders and forming those relationships, that is social adaptation. It's incredibly powerful. So if we look at the Chicago heat wave, which was a massive heat wave, you know, an awful lot of people died. The studies of that show us that people who were socially connected were so much less likely to die, even though they might have been more physically vulnerable. So there's just quite a lot of power in that social connectivity. Now, it doesn't hold back floodwater. I totally accept that. And we are in for a rough time. And I think we've all started to understand that. And I'm not pretending that that isn't difficult. And I've just put the Climate Psychology Alliance website just in the chat there. It really, my goal here is to start that very difficult conversation, to see where people feel like they could start to think about this stuff, or maybe not. I think it's totally legitimate not to feel like that's something that you can take on.
Yeah, I just think need more people. We just all need to convince more people to give up a very dull job.
Yeah.
Well, they might have a dull job. They might have a job that does nothing. To do half of it, and just help with this situation. Anyway, thank you.
Danny, I'm aware that you had your hand up at one point.
I did, yeah. Maybe you've already posted it, but you mentioned earlier about kit, and I spoke to Henry in a conversation a while ago, and you made a really good example, or a good point around, we were talking about this potential venue that we had, and his idea was that we put flood bags outside as part of the decoration of this particular building, but it was also an example of adaptation that we would need. And what I would like is for our space to have more examples of that, have the kit there ready in a library of things with all of the other library of things that, you know, tools and sewing equipment, etc. And I would also like to have in my the space an explanation. I need to find someone who's a bit of a data geek, but also a graphic designer, who can take the information around Kingston's carbon budget, for instance, right? They've got money sitting around that developers give them as their carbon offset. And they don't have a plan. They don't calculate how much of that money actually really physically carbon offsets the impact of these buildings. I mean, I'm still asking the question. I don't know for certain, but what I'd like to have is kind of some visual explanations of, if we build with this much carbon, this is how many trees we need to plant in Kingston to offset that. And do you think the council are going to do that? You know, that kind of stuff where it's where people can see the things that are causing the problems, and then also see the things that they can do.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, purchasing offsetting credits is a complicated business, and maybe it's a good one to have for another session. In my own place of work, I've decided to try and capture the offsetting money to plant fruit and nut trees. They're very rarely productive trees. And so that's a bit of a problem. Let's see what I get away with. But that battle's being fought just now. In terms of creating a list of resources or resources within a CEC, I think that is a really legitimate discussion for another conversation here, because I think it will be quite particular to individual CECs, and it could be that you need to be careful about the resources that you have. You want to choose things that you definitely know how to use. I would wonder about things like cooking equipment and things like that, but they can be very difficult to store, quite difficult to insure if you're storing them, especially in a meanwhile lease. So I think we would need a little bit of help to think that through. But I think it's a really, really good idea, and the way to think about how you're going to contact vulnerable people. The assumption is that the local authority will be able to help with that. But what we know from Storm Desmond is that the laptops failed and they had the lists on them. And so, you know, it can be quite complicated.
I was thinking of it more as in, like, you know, when you go to the Science Museum and they have like little show home versions of what like there's one that's about earthquakes, right? So I was kind of imagining an education piece in what we're doing, that look, if there's a flood, a bit like your guy with the glass thing there, to spark people off into thinking, oh, this is an emergency.
What would I need? What would I have?
Yeah.
Grab bags and things like that. Before I come to you, Mo, I'm just aware that Sue put something in the chat which I wanted to respond to. Thanks for your question, Sue. And then I'll come back to Mo, and we've got about 8 minutes left. So Phoenix, do you need to finish? Should we try and finish in a couple of minutes so that you've got a bit of finish up time?
Just to say, we're generally fairly tight on the hour, but we were always happy to ask the group, do they mind extending by 5 or 10 minutes? It's a very, very useful conversation. We can check when we come close if people are up for extending to 5 past. Let me switch to gallery view. Are people, let me test 2 test waters. We'll test for 8:05 or 8:10. Is the group up for extending to 8:05? Yeah, that seems most people. Can't see Claire. At 8:10, 8:10. Yeah, that's most, I think. Yeah, okay. So keep it going. It's a really useful conversation. We'll go to 8:10 and finish.
Okay. So I just want to restate before we go forward, in case people start to drop out now, that I know this is a frightening conversation, and I would encourage you to either come back to us or look at the Climate Psychology Alliance stuff if you're feeling anxious. So in terms of getting in touch with emergency teams in councils, I think this is a brilliant idea. I think CECs joining up with those, you might be disappointed to learn that there is not much emergency provision. I mean, we've all now come through a pandemic and we know what it's like when the emergency provisions get whittled away. But in many cases, there will be an emergency team. It might be only part of somebody's job. But my experience has been that they are really skilled individuals and they will fall on you because the idea that somebody else is thinking about this and thinking about what might happen, they would be invaluable, and they will have a sense of the locality in the way that I couldn't possibly hope to help with. So I think that's a really, really smart idea. And they may even have underspend at the end of years where they would be able to help a little bit with resources. Certainly, they will be working alongside flood the Flood Forum and the Scottish Flood Forum and people like that who are trying to do preparatory work in communities that are likely to be flooded. I have to tell you that in most cases, they cannot work in places that haven't been flooded because they can't get traction. It's only flooded communities that are easy to work in to try and do preparedness. So that may change, but that's where we are now. So I think it's a really, really good idea, Sue. And I think maybe that's something that we should start to think about. And it may be that that's something that needs to go into the manual at some point, Phoenix, I don't know. And then I wanted to go back to Mo, who had his hand up, and then Phoenix.
So I lived in Houston for 10 years, and Houston gets flooded every 2 years, more or less.
Wow.
And they've got a whole bunch of stuff that you need to keep to be able to survive flooding.
Right.
So it's very easy to get the list of things, things like candles, light batteries, hand-wound radios, and water purifiers, and tin food. So if there's a need, I can get a list of how to survive flooding.
Yeah, so we could start to co-produce a list. That would be really cool. I didn't know about Houston, because when I think about Houston, I think about heat wave, to be honest. I didn't know about the flooding.
Hurricanes, very common.
Right. And then it was Phoenix.
Just a few things, this network really is about helping each other, not reinvent the wheel and accelerate, setting up these physical spaces that are then the motherships for many other projects and things. And building community resilience is something that's been around for a time, and we really need to work at that through these CECs, creating toolkits that can help people that we can put on websites, and the handbook, that would be great. And there's already, like Mo was just saying, there's already a lot of good toolkits out there and things that we could just copy and link up and share more as a UK and a wider network. There's groups in other countries, from Germany to Argentina to Ireland, who want to set up CECs. Last point there is Occupy Sandy. One of the things I was involved with the Occupy movement, and a bit afterwards there was a massive, I think, hurricane flood, Occupy Sandy, and what they found was that community organized networks responded quicker and were more effective and dealt with things very quickly on how to rescue people and deal with these things than FEMA or whatever, the big federal emergency management agency, and others who were really late getting there. And FEMA had billions in funding and resources and Land Rovers and helicopters and everything, but it still took them a week or whatever to turn up, whereas Occupy Sandy was in there giving out flashlights and food and helping rescuing people or whatever it was. So, there is a good thing to be said about community networks built strong, or, can, and automatically, people are good. People automatically go into that helping out in a disaster situation, and they do bond together and they do help each other out. And if we've built these centres and we've done some preparations, I like one of the things someone earlier said, like training and preparation. What would you do if there was a flood? What would you do if there was, a blackout of electricity? What renewable energy do you have? Do you know anything about it? Do you have a toolkit for flooding around somewhere? And if we can start to run some of those kind of things through the different climate emergency centres, we can be more prepared for when things do come, and more resilient. And hopefully that's what we're building through these centres, various infrastructure for that. Over.
Great. That's really great. It really is about the relationships, and we all have been in situations where you've had to work with somebody that you know well in a difficult situation, and it is so much smoother and more seamless than when you're trying to create that relationship and work in a really difficult situation. So that is social adaptation to some extent, is just having those relationships built and a sense of trust. You've given me lots of ideas about other things that I should put into the list of resources that I send out. Unless other people have got questions, I'm wondering whether to read this Solnit quote, because it is quite uplifting and it might be a really good place to end. But what do you think, Phoenix?
Can I just check in Claire Wallerstein? I think she's joined while we're chatting. Claire, do you just want to say hello? Just quickly, briefly check in, or where are you around the country, or a particular group? Over.
Sorry, I'm having terrible trouble unmuting myself there. Hi, I'm in Cornwall actually. I've literally just popped in the past couple of minutes because somebody suggested that this would be an interesting thing to listen in on, but I'm kind of was in the middle of doing something else as well, hence being mute and invisible. I'm the producer for a series called Cornwall's Climate Stories. We're making a series of half-hour documentaries about all sorts of different things on different themes to do with climate change in Cornwall. You know, really just trying to sort of focus on getting people on a kind of page together rather than just sort of thinking we're talking about polar bears and people on Pacific Islands. And our first films have been mostly around sort of marine themes. The one we're just about to bring out is actually looking at everything to do with fresh water. So there's quite a lot of focus there on, obviously, on flooding and you know, all sorts of things around that. Community emergency response and sustainable urban drainage and stuff like that. And then the films that we're going into next are more sort of human things. So we've got one on transport and energy and housing and everything else. That's in a nutshell. So I've really sort of come in on the tail end, but so I can't really contribute anything, but hello.
Hello, Claire. You've just contributed a load there, actually. It's called sustainable urban drainage. I want to hear more about that at some point. Yeah, maybe you could link us in on the films and tell us.
Yeah, sure. Shall I put a link to our website in the chat, and then you can have a look at the first 3. We've got this next one coming out. It's nearly finished, but it's not going to launch, I think, until the 22nd of April. All our films, they're half-hour documentaries. They're all presented by a different person who's kind of sort of relevant to the topic. So we've had one looking at climate change in the fishing industry in Cornwall, one looking at the marine environment in general, one looking at coastal erosion and sea level rise. So that obviously had a lot of focus on the violent possibilities and things that have already happened. And this one, I think it's going to be really good, but they're all kind of like a Wikipedia entry because they've just got so much material in them. So, you know, this one's everything from sewage discharges to sewage overflows to beavers and salmon and, you know, everything. But they're a bit mad.
Absolute mine of information there, Claire. That's fantastic. I'm not sure if we've got a CC set up in Cornwall yet. I know there's one in Taunton and Devon and around that way, but my mum's lot were Launceston, I think. So would definitely be good to hear more about Cornwall, as if the centre could be set up there somewhere.
Yeah, I was actually recommended to listen in by Amanda Brookman, who you must know, and she's down here in Cornwall. So
yeah. All right, fantastic. Any more comments on the group? I think we've got about 8 minutes, so just on. So, and I think Becs wants to read something. So, any quick comment or question from the rest of the group? It's been a fascinating talk, very interesting, and I think we need to do another session with Becs. She did mention she might be up for a second helping at some point, maybe in another month or 2. We do a adaptation version 2. Anyone in the group over want a quick comment or question or anything? Okay, over to Becs then, I think. For
I'm just making sure I've got that link, because that's really helpful. So pleased that you spoke. That's really great. Okay, so this is my new favourite book, and it's called, it's Rebecca Solnit. If you haven't come across her, she's an American writer and journalist. And it's called A Paradise Built in Hell, which sounds really grim, but it's the most uplifting book. It's incredible. So I'm just going to read you one quick paragraph from the introduction. So this is her talking about her experience of engaging with people who've been in a difficult situation. I landed in Halifax, Nova Scotia, shortly after a big hurricane tore up the city in October of 2003. The man in charge of taking me round told me about the hurricane, not about the winds that roared at more than 100 miles an hour and tore up trees, roofs and telephone poles, or about the seas that rose nearly 10 feet, but about the neighbours. He spoke of the few days when everything was disrupted, and he lit up with happiness as he did so. In his neighbourhood, all the people had come out of their houses to speak to each other, aid each other, improvise a community kitchen, make sure the elders were okay, and spend time together. They were no longer strangers. He said, everyone woke up the next morning and everything was different, he mused. There was no electricity, all the stores were closed, no one had access to media. The consequence was that everyone poured out into the street to bear witness. not quite a street party, but everyone out at once. It was a sense of happiness to see everybody, even though we didn't know each other. His joy struck me powerfully. And this is the motivation for her writing this book. And I have to tell you, she's not underestimating the significant power of these awful events and how dramatically they affect people's lives. But she's pointing us to all these examples of where people have come together in a way that they would always have wanted to do, but that capitalism gets in the way. So there is something really, really hopeful about creating these connections and allowing people to come together. And that is actually a story of resilience. So I'll just leave it there. I hope that's not too simple a thing, because it suggests that this is not a complicated subject. But there is also the power of human connection, which is really something that we can kind of look to, really.
That is really inspiring. That is really inspiring. That really brings up a lot of memories from various different protest projects and situations at the end of festivals and things where people all help each other out when it's been flooded. That's really inspiring. Yeah, we all need to realise when the things really hit the fan, we all need to come together and cooperate, and a lot of differences get dropped, and the beautiful people come out of their isolation and build community and work on solutions and help each other and do the best they can. It's that kind of blitz spirit or whatever they talk about in World War II. Dig in for victory. All right, it's been a fascinating session. Do we want to just do a quick checkout, folks? A few words, a couple of sentences about anything you want to check out on, or any inspiration from the talk. And we'll definitely get Becs back maybe in a couple of months to do adaptation 2 and see where we can go from there. See if we can build some toolkits and some training things and get some centres building community resilience programs. Over. Okay, so that's my checkout. Very inspiring. I will pass over to Henry in Hackney. He's already got his boat ready for the rising waters. Over.
Yeah, I live on the river, so I'm looking forward to rising waters. Yeah, I thought that was inspiring. I think what resonates, Hackney had really bad flooding in a school 3 or 4 years ago, inundated, closed for months, cost them like millions. I went back to the school and I said, well, what measures have you done in case it floods again? They went, nothing. We just rebuilt the school. I went, well, have you not got sandbags? Have you not made space for water, drainage? Like, no, it cost us £1 million. And it's like, even when they've been so hit, it still hasn't sunk in that it's called Well Street because all the wells in Hackney were built there, because that's where all the water gathered. And that's where your school is, in the poorest, most unsuitable land. So I like the idea where a climate emergency centre could actually have sessions where you physically make sandbags, hopefully out of like a circular economy, some waste stream. And when the floods do come, you're going to need hundreds and hundreds of sandbags. And, you put a little initial or a little date when that sandbag was made, So that was a really inspiring, practical angle. So yeah, thanks for that. It's been an interesting talk, and I think also on our CEC National or Space Generators website, that environmental resource for you sticking a postcode in, because that's a really powerful way. Blow that up, put it really big as you walk into like Guildford. That most towns have a river going through because that's where trade came from. So where are your risk zones, and focusing on those communities, because it's a much easier conversation to say, hi, just to let you know your flood's at risk, your house at risk of flooding, do you know that? And that will definitely get the conversation going. So yeah, thank you, it's been a good session. I'll pass over to the lovely lady in Kingston who has got some good ideas.
Danny, is it?
I'm going to assume that's me. I found I've got more questions. I'm thinking more things about a school that I know is really at risk of flooding, that's right next to my workplace, where there's lots of debate at the moment about development, and a huge big development going smack bang in this area that's prone to flooding. So I'm thinking about the conversations that I want to have around that and the things that I can do in this community space that I'm working in right next to it. So yeah, it's given me loads of really, really good food for thought. Thank you. And I will pass to Sue in Bath.
Can I just quickly, sorry, just quickly from Henry's point. Just quickly, Henry, so there are these really important regional examples of people, of regions that are taking action. And if we have another session, I will focus on those in a bit more detail because they're really, really empowering. And it's very like what Claire is talking about, actually, a lot of SUDs and those kind of things. Sorry, go on. Sorry, Sue.
Oh, that's fine. Yeah, thank you. It's been really interesting because I hadn't really thought about it in connection with the CEC sort of before now. So we haven't got a CEC yet, but we're having conversations with people. So yeah, thank you. It's really interesting. And I'll hand over to Alex, who I can see on my screen.
Yeah, I don't have much to contribute tonight, but plenty of food for thought. So thank you very much, Becs and Phoenix. Yeah, it's been, I'll go away and think. Over to you, Claire.
Yeah, I can't really say very much because I didn't see very much of it. And if I say anything, it's probably repeating stuff that has already been said. But I'm sure you're probably all very aware of this. But I just thought maybe quite interesting, if not, one of the people who we have actually featured in this latest film, she actually runs a company that produces or sells all sorts of flood mitigation devices and property flood what do you call it, property flood resilience stuff, you know, so many things. I mean, I had no idea, you know, forget about sandbags, she's got special pads which absorb 20 litres of water and putty to put around your cable ducts and, you know, all sorts of stuff to stop the water getting in. But what she was telling us about, which, you know, I had no idea about any of this, was of course, you know, in Cornwall, we've got 28,000 properties that are at risk of flooding, not necessarily near a river, not necessarily on the coast. I mean, you can be at risk of flooding in all sorts of places, particularly here, you know, where we're very rural. And with increasingly intensified agriculture, we're getting a lot more runoff from the land in these heavy rainfall events because the soil's so compacted. So it's almost like tarmac, and we've got the second highest house building targets in the country after London. So we're having 50,000 houses built in the next 10 years, you know, and so much stuff being done without any proper planning. But the thing that she was talking about was insurance, which is her big worry, because of course we've got the flood insurance system at the moment, which means that anybody who lives in a house, as long as it was built pre-2009, you can get flood insurance, regardless of where you are, sort of reasonably priced flood insurance. But that's actually coming to an end in only 18 years, which people don't know about. And what she was talking about was that the government is thinking of sort of trying to trial almost like a traffic light system, or not a traffic light system, more like how you have the energy performance certificates for properties now, looking at a similar sort of thing to grade your flood resilience. Depending on, you know, whether you get an A or a G, you know, you will or won't be able to mortgage your property, sell your property, or insure your property. And so she was saying, you know, that's a really good way of approaching people to talk about flooding, because, you know, everybody cares about whether their house still has value or whether they're going to be able to insure it. And it's a sort of actually really good way of getting people to consider their risk and put in place resilience measures.
Cool. Claire, you mentioned a link there for somebody who had all these resources for flooding. Could you pop that link in somewhere? I'm definitely interested in that. Should we pass over? Who wants to go next? Just on checkouts, feedback from the session. Over to Deb in sunny Preston.
Hi, yeah, I really enjoyed today. Sorry I'm late. Yeah, like what Claire was saying about the insurance thing, we had the same with the fracking. People weren't so bothered about the fracking until they learnt like the effects of earthquakes could cause structural damage on the homes and then make it cost less. So it's definitely worth going down that avenue with people, because the homes are like the castles, aren't they? So that's what they find more like most important. They don't care about the environment around, they care more about the home. So yeah, who's not been? More? Have you been?
Thanks. No, so yeah, I really enjoyed the discussion. I think it's really important that we have more detailed discussions on adaptation, and the starting point may be mental adaptation, because I think we haven't got used to the idea that world is changing and the changes will be drastic. There would be nothing like what we have experienced so far. So mental adaptation, I think, will be a good starting point, but I think these are really valuable discussions. So who hasn't been? Suzanne?
Thanks, Mo. Yeah, hi. Fascinating, just fascinating. I could stay here all day and talk to you guys. Sure you can too if you only had time. I think there's lots to tie together here, from sort of workshopping grief on COVID and the idea of having a citizen assembly on what good that came out of COVID, and then the community aspect of sort of like, as Mo said, building up that psychological resilience as to like how we've just gone through the last month of having a war on our doorstep. You know, these are huge shifts for us. What I would say is to tie in with what Deb has said is, yeah, it's people's homes that they just go, oh, I was down in zero, Guildford Zero, and they weren't expecting a guy to walk into the Climate Hub and say, I would really like your help on solutions to my home. We need to make our home, you know, do better for the environment. He said, we're prepared to spend £30,000. What can we do? Who do I need to talk to? So yeah, Guildford's got a huge river, and that flooding would have been one of the things that he would have to do. So yeah, pass over to Tom. Excellent.
Thanks. Yeah, really interesting discussion. I know I've not contributed a huge amount, but it's been good to be in the room. I think it's quite interesting with the flooding thing, being in Hexham on the River Tyne, yet it's an issue that's not really talked about at all in the town or even in the valley. It's kind of seen as something that's downstream. But just looking at that website that you put up, resource, and actually there's a huge amount of flooding risk within the town and things that are like surface water related by the look of it. So it's quite interesting just to have that idea that there's issues that are not spoken about at all, even within the kind of our communities that are aware of these issues. They're kind of just hiding away. Yeah, thank you.
Just as a last point, really, just to come back on that. So I've just talked a little bit about flooding today because we don't have very much time, but heat wave is also, overheating is a real issue. And Claire was talking about all these new houses that were being built, and I wish that I could say that they will all be protecting the people who are going to spend a huge amount of money on them from overheating, but that isn't the case. Unfortunately, a huge amount of those houses will overheat. So that is another issue that we should spend some time on.
Fascinating. I think we definitely need a Becs adaptation number 2. Is there one person left to check out? What is it, Sue? Is there anyone else? Has everyone checked out? All right, just very briefly, I've got a couple of announcements, and then we're going to have our traditional, play a little bit of music so you can jump around a bit, because some people actually spend 6 hours of their day in Zooms and don't get out their chairs. We introduced it a little, moving around the end. Next week, we have a general Thursday, 31st of March, 7 p.m. Zoom general advice and chat session around the network. Welcome to come to that. April the 7th, we've got Jules coming to talk about community climate action, practical steps you can take right now. Learn how to decarbonize your community and grow community resilience. All sorts of really useful information in there. That's April the 7th. April the 14th, another general network support Zoom. And then April 21st, the very infamous Jamie Kelsey-Fry is coming to talk about Adventures in Democracy 1, a short history of people's assemblies and participatory democracy. That's going to be very exciting. And then on Thursday, 28th of April, we've got Gareth from solve.earth talking about regenerative economy and whole new legal entities that kind of fair shares, commons, changing the entire system that we have in companies and things to make things more fair and even and sustainable for the planet. Keeping up the system change theme with climate emergency centres. All right, guys, thank you very much for coming and giving us a bit over an hour of your precious time. I'm going to play a little bit of music now as tradition. You can disappear off as you need. I'm going to save the chat. We'll stop recording now.